All right, so welcome. My name is Mario Sanchez, and I'm part of the Sumo Learning team here at Sumo Logic. And today I'm going to walk you through how to become a Sumo Pro user. Essentially, this is that level 1 certification that you can achieve. As you are all aware, because you probably registered through our site, this is one of three courses that we lead. Today is the Sumo Logic QuickStart, which is over to the left. But tomorrow we're running using Sumo Logic, and then the day after we're running setting up Sumo Logic, which is more for administrators and for those of you who are getting data into Sumo. But long story short, each one of these gets you certified for level 1, level 2, and level 3, which I would highly recommend that you try out. So with that said, let's get started. So today I'm going to walk you through 5 basic steps. The first one is, how does Sumo Logic help me? And actually, now that I think of that, I need to do a little bit of housekeeping before I can show you that. I'm going to insert some errors into my demo, just so that I can show you how this works. So we're going to be using this TravelLogic instance as a demo. And give me just 1 second here so I can just insert some errors and get this going. Looks like control. No, it's not bad. I thought this would do the trick, but it looks like my keyboard is having some issues. Let's see. No, all right, no worries. I'm not sure why this is not going on. It looks like something is thinking there in the corner. All right, well, we'll get started, and hopefully we will have some errors in our demo. So I'm going to walk you through a demo of how to use Sumo Logic for troubleshooting, for monitoring and troubleshooting. And what I was just doing now is trying to insert some. Okay, hey, I hope you guys are there. It looks like we had some connectivity issue here with our instance. Let me share that screen, and let's get going again. Okay, so as I was mentioning before, I'm going to walk you through a demo of how Sumo Logic is used, and then we're going to kind of take a step back and start showing you from a 30,000-foot view, how do I use Sumo? What data is available to me so I can start analyzing that data? And also, how can I search? How can I parse my data? How can I analyze? And most of you are probably here because of your logs. We're going to walk you through how to use those logs, but we're also going to show you how to use your metrics, how to bring those metrics into Sumo and be able to analyze them. And then at the end, we're going to talk about, great, we can search them, we can parse them, I can analyze them, but I want to keep an eye on this. I want to start monitoring trends over time. Perhaps I want to identify outliers in those critical events. How do I do that with dashboards? How do I do that with alerts? And lastly, we're going to end up with, all right, what else can you learn going forward with Sumo Logic? Okay, so with that said, let's jump into, you'll notice that as I go through this training, there are some labs that I point you to. We're not doing this face-to-face, so you'll have to do them at your own pace. But this is where you would go. There's a tutorial that shows you how to do those labs, as well as a training environment. This is an instance that we have available for you that has data where you can try a lot of the labs that I will be demoing today as we go through this. And if you have questions beyond this session, you can certainly join the conversation in our community. If you go to community.sumologic.com, you can post questions, you can review existing answers, and of course, you can join us on Slack. We also have a Slack channel that is ongoing. And last but not least, this course, this webinar prepares you to that certification level 1. It's an online exam, 30 multiple choice questions, 60 minutes. Most people take about 20 to 30 minutes to complete. So I would highly encourage that you try that as well. All right, so let's get started. How does Sumo Logic help me? So what I was mentioning before is that I was going to use this instance, TravelLogic, this fake company, to give you an understanding of a quick demo. So TravelLogic is a company very similar to yours, where it has it's been built on microservices. It's got Kubernetes and Docker, and it's got a database from one location, perhaps is an AWS shop. The point here is that similar to your modern apps, the trick or the hard part today is, how do I get visibility across all my different components, right? And Travelogic is no different. It has the same situation. So what I want to show you is how would I use a tool like Sumo Logic to keep an eye on this kind of stuff. So here is what we call an operational overview dashboard. What I've done here is I've built a dashboard for Travelogic that really lets me see a wide range of all those different components. So if you notice, for example, here in the top left, I keep an eye on my reporting nodes. But here, the second one over to the right is my ELB 500s. I can keep a look at my ELB response times. How about my VPC network rejects? Here's database issues. If you're in an AWS workshop, this could be your RDS. So what you're seeing here is that I have a panel or a tile to keep an eye on various different components, whether they happen to be from different source data. It doesn't matter. I have one dashboard that gives me this single view into all my environment. I see my checkout service, my Redis issues, my worker issues. So on a normal day, if everything is going well, I would expect to see greens here, and I would expect everything to be in pretty good shape. Let me refresh this dashboard here for just a little bit. Because what I've done is I've actually gone to my demo and inserted some errors so that a couple of things start breaking. So you notice how a few of these are turning yellow now because a couple of things are going on. The other thing that would happen is not only would I get yellows and reds in here, I would most likely get a Slack alert in my travel ops channel. You notice that I've set it up so that I can get an alert on my Slack channel. Let me just refresh this one more time. But what you're going to be seeing here is that I'm starting to get a few more reds going on. By the way, you notice that I have to hit the refresh button. This is because it's just for a demo. In your environment, you would just turn this dashboard to live mode, as you see here in the top right-hand corner. What that means is that this dashboard would get refreshed automatically, and there's no need for me to be refreshing it. I would just all of a sudden start seeing some reds. And if I see those reds happening, it's certainly telling me that some stuff is going on. So if you notice, I'm getting a lot of 500 errors. I don't have any database errors, but it looks like my checkout service is getting quite a few errors now. That means that people are trying to go to my site, go to my Travelogic site. They're trying to book some travel. Let's say that they're going from San Francisco over to Los Angeles. And when they're trying to book that travel or perhaps check out and pay, they're not able to pay. So I'm getting some, definitely a business issue. People are not being able to give me their money. So what you're seeing is a lot of reds. Now, from this monitoring that I'm doing here, I realize that there is a little bit of issues going on. I can see that clearly my checkout service is having some issues. What I can do is I can click on this particular pane, on this particular panel called the checkout service. And what it's doing now is it's opening, it's doing a drill through, and it's opening a services detail dashboard, right? And this dashboard is now showing me quite a few things. Let me show you with the first one here in the top left-hand side. As a matter of fact, let me click this magnifying glass to make it a little bit bigger. What I see here is that these are my bookings. This is people actually booking flights or booking hotels or car at my Travelogic site. And it looks like my count of successes, if you notice, this one is up at 66. This one here is up at 109. So I was getting a lot of successful bookings on my site. But then all of a sudden, somewhere around, by the way, I'm in Eastern time, that's why you see 105. But sometime around maybe like 3-4 minutes ago, I started getting a drop in my successes, which is shown here by a green area. And I started getting an increase in failed bookings. So from a monitoring perspective, not only do I know that something is going on, I know from a business perspective what the impact is. The metrics are telling me that I have an increase in failed bookings. I still don't know why, right? I still am trying to figure out what's going on, but I have a pretty clear picture that people are having a hard time booking this my site. So if I go back to the slides that I didn't show you before in this demo of monitoring and troubleshooting, I'm alerted of some critical event, whether it is a Slack or an alert or pager duty, or perhaps I looked at my dashboard and I started seeing some reds. I'm alerted of some event that is going on, of some anomaly. So the first thing that I will do is I'm going to start looking at my metrics to try to identify the what is going on with my environment. And that's what I saw so far, right? I now have a good idea that my bookings are failing. The real trick here, the sweet spot is that what I will want to do eventually is I want to correlate to the relevant logs. I want to look at my metrics and then look at the relevant logs so that I can understand the why something is happening. Not just what is going on, but why that is going on. So let me walk you through this demo and show you that. So top left-hand side, remember, is showing me the bookings. This one down here is showing me errors for the last 7 days. So in this same time period, from around noon all the way till around 1:10 p.m., it's showing me that for the most part, the previous days have had no errors, except for errors for 5 days ago, where I did have a spike in errors around the same time. That's only because I ran the same exact demo about 5 days ago. But you can imagine that this would be showing me that there were no errors for all other days except for today. This is the orange line here is showing me that today I had a big spike in errors. So what that is trying to help you identify is this something that happens all the time around 1 p.m. in the afternoon every day, or is this some anomaly that is just happening today? Similarly, this one on the right-hand side, let me just refresh it so that we get more up-to-date information. This one on the right-hand side is showing me my gateway latency, and it's showing that everything seemed to be normal. And then again, around 1:05 today, I get an outlier. I get a big spike in that gateway latency, and that's what those pink triangles there are denoting. They're showing me outliers. Same, the one down here at the bottom, gateway latency delta. The delta seemed to be okay for the most part, but then all of a sudden around 1:05, I have a huge delta between one point and the next. So just a very easy visual way to start identifying what's going on. And if it wasn't enough, over here on the left-hand side, I can see errors by node. So I can see that my worker node hasn't had that many errors, maybe 3 errors. This one has had 2 errors. But these 2 over here, shown in red bars, are clearly showing me that my travel checkout node, if you notice, it says source name, customer service team, travel checkout, and then some ID. That checkout node and the one right below it are having a large number of errors. Look at the count. It says 366 errors. Let me make this just a little bit bigger so that you guys can see it a little more clearly. So now I know that something is definitely going on. I have my bookings that are starting to fail. I'm having errors that started popping up around that same time. My gateway latency is going on. I have a count of errors, and wouldn't it be great to go and see what those errors actually happen to be, right? Because that's going to tell me the why. Let me show you this one at the top right-hand side, my CPU and total memory. Let me just expand this one for just a little bit. So enlarging this one here, I can see that this green line is showing me my memory, and memory seem to be okay. You know, it's going up, it's going down, it's just the use of memory. But these lines down here are showing me CPU. They're showing me CPU for the different nodes, right? So this is my travel product node, and it continues normally all the way through. Here's others, let's say this the blue one, this is a travel worker node, and that one seems to continue. But if you notice, here's a couple that actually have a big spike. Here is one in yellow, and that one's a travel checkout node. Okay, so that's the one that was having an issue before, right? Remember, we saw those large number of errors. And this one down here, the light blue one, is also a travel checkout node. So now I'm starting to get a good sense that clearly something is going on with my travel checkout nodes. They have a huge spike in CPU. They also have a huge, we saw a huge spike in the number of errors. And I would definitely like to see what errors happen. What are the errors that are showing up for that? So what I'm going to show you now is, instead of drilling to yet another dashboard, I'm actually this time going to drill to the actual query behind it, because I want to start doing a little bit of analytics and trying to identify a little more of what's going on. So this dashboard is coming back with 2 queries. I'm sorry, this query is coming back with two parts to it. One of them is looking for CPU total. The other one is looking for memory usage. And we know that memory usage wasn't a big deal, so I could even turn that off if I want to. But now let's look at this one, which is the metric. This is the CPU metric itself. Again, here is that big spike that we were talking about before, right? There's a big spike for the travel checkout nodes. What I'm going to do is the following. I am actually going to look at the logs for that same time period. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about metadata later on, but basically metadata is a way to tag all the messages that are coming into Sumo Logic. And one of the tags that is most important is the source category one, because I can use that to tag it with whatever I want that data to be tagged with. So in this case, I know it's my travel checkout node that is having an issue. I'm going to look at the logs for that travel checkout node. So I'm going to be looking at all the data for the CS team travel checkout node that I want in there. So I'm going to just run that query. And what it's going to do is it's going to come back and say, great, here are the metrics that you were looking at, your CPU. And up here is it's your logs. So these logs, these blocks that you see here are the number of messages. Notice that the darker the color, the more messages I've had around that time. If you notice, this little block that I have where I have my mouse has 1,300 messages, whereas if I look at this lighter one, it only has 297 messages. So it just tells you the density of the number of the density in the color is the number of messages that you've had. All right, so far so good. I'm seeing that I see the logs, and I can click on the logs, and what's going to happen is down here, it's going to show me the actual logs for that time period. But wouldn't it be more interesting to look at only the logs that have errors? Because that's what I'm trying to identify. So I'm going to go back to my query, and I'm going to say, yes, give me the messages, give me all the logs from the travel checkout, but only give me those that have the word error in it. And if I run that query now, what you'll see is I have my metrics again, as you saw before, and look at this. Here are my messages with actual words that have error. So right before that, I had absolutely no errors. See 0 messages here. But then all of a sudden, when I had that huge spike in CPU, I started getting quite a few messages in here. So let's do this. Let's click on one of those, and let's look at the messages that were shown in that time. And there you go. Here are the messages for that particular time frame, for that time slice, that have the word error. And if you notice, this one has some sort of error that says SSL routine, some sort of certificate issue, right? Certificate verified failed, as you can see here. I'm having some other error down here. Here's another one saying access denied. And you get the point, quite a few errors. Here's the same error message, right? The certificate verified failed. And I could eyeball this, I can eyeball these messages and try to identify what the issue happens to be. Now, in this case, it's just a handful, so maybe eyeballing them might not be that difficult. But how do you know if you should look at this particular query, time slice, or this time slice, and so on, right? So what I'm going to show you is yet a better way of identifying this stuff. I'm going to, instead of clicking here and looking at the errors down at the bottom, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use shift click, as you see there in the bubble. It says shift click to open and search. I'm going to do a shift click. And what that does is it opens that same exact query in my log searching window, which allows me to do a lot more. For example, if you look at this, I have about 13 pages worth of messages. As a matter of fact, that's 314 messages with the word error. Now, as most of us know, whatever caused this issue probably doesn't have the word error in it. So what I would really want to do is I want to search for all my log messages around that time frame, not just those that have the word error. And even more interesting is the error probably had already occurred. Look at this. This is from 109 to 110. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to choose data for a bigger time period, maybe for the last 15 minutes, so that it can go back and find what was causing the error. Or maybe let's choose minus 30 minutes so that I can grab a bigger time frame and find out what is going on. So I'm running my query, and most of you guys would be thinking now, well, I mean, that's a little crazy, Mario, because now you just expanded the time frame. You're looking for a lot more data. That's 30,000 messages. Oops, that's 30,000 messages that you're pulling in. Let me make this a little bit bigger for you. Okay, that's about 30,000 messages that you're pulling in. How are you going to go through 30,000 messages and start searching for what the issue happens to be? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you that I can actually use what we call the easy button, or in this case, log reduce. And by clicking log reduce, what it's doing right now is it's going through those 30,000 messages, and it's actually compiling them into signatures. It's identifying messages that look very, very similar. Okay, the transaction ID might be different. Perhaps the port number might be different. The date is obviously going to be different because of timestamps. But it's coming back and saying, listen, all these messages look so similar that I'm going to put them together in a signature. As a matter of fact, there were 4,635 messages that all look very similar, right? It also said there's all these other messages that look very similar, so it comes back and starts compiling them. So instead of having pages and pages of messages, if you notice, I only have 1 page worth of signatures in here. So this allows me to start sifting through the noise and start identifying what are those things that are really important for me to identify. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I usually like to do is I just like to look at what are those messages that don't happen that often. In this case, here's one that just has a count of 1. This is a message that really only happened once. In this case, look at this. Here is a message that only happened twice. And let me bring your attention to this message, because this is an interesting one. Look at this one. It says, I am starting the Travelogic app. I'm starting the cluster called something something checkout, which is the one that we know has the issue with. And it's saying, by the way, I'm starting version 1.14.dev. So this is pretty telling for me. This means that someone put development code into my production environment, right? This happened twice, which leads me to believe it is the 2 different, if you remember, there were 2 checkout nodes that were giving me issue, these checkout nodes. So I'm going to, what this basically tells me is that these 2 travel checkout nodes were, someone installed the development code into it, and that's what's causing, if I go back and try to walk you through this, what that's going on is that that development code probably has the wrong SSL certificate, and that's what's causing these 1,000 messages worth of certificate verify fail, and it's causing all these issues in my instance, which is causing a increase in CPU for those 2 nodes, which is what's causing, at the end of the day, I wanted to click on this one, which is what's causing, at the end of the day, my bookings to fail. So what you saw here is that I went from, let me go to this. I went from getting alerted or getting notified of a critical event, diving into the metrics, identifying what is going on with those metrics, and then correlating the relevant logs, looking at the relevant logs and identifying why something is happening so that I can backtrack and eventually identify why this happened. Now, just to round up this exercise, if this was something that happened once, what I would want to do is, and I didn't show you this earlier for a particular reason, but if you remember this dashboard and it had all these panels from all these different sources, down here at the bottom right, I have one called deployed versions. And what I would do with this one is I can see if development code has been deployed into my environment. Perhaps I could even set up an alert to let me know if development code gets installed, to alert me so that I don't have to go through the same scenario again. Okay, let me pause there for just a second and let me open it up and see if there's any questions from the audience. Does this monitor and troubleshoot exercise make sense? Good. If I hear no questions, I'm assuming it does. And okay, so clearly someone had to go through the motions of building these dashboards that I just showed you. I showed you some dashboards, I showed you some queries, and it was pretty easy for me to troubleshoot because someone had already done the effort of creating a lot of these. So what I'm going to show you today is, what if you don't have those dashboards in place? And most likely you don't. You're new to Sumo Logic, you're kind of starting. How do you create those dashboards? How do you create those metrics? How do you create those alerts in Sumo? So that's what I'm going to walk you through. From a 30,000-foot view, Sumo Logic's data flow is broken into 3 areas. Data collection, which is done through sources and collectors, and we won't cover that today. We actually cover that on Thursday for those of you who are joining. What we're going to focus today is number 2 and number 3. One is, how do you start searching? How do you start analyzing your data using the operators? And then once you search and analyze that data, how do you visualize that? How do you put that into dashboards? How do you put it into alerts so that you can start visualizing that kind of stuff as well? All right, even though I said I wasn't going to talk about collecting data, very briefly, long story short is you can send just about any data to Sumo Logic, whether it's a cloud-to-cloud integration like an S3 bucket or perhaps an API to Google Apps or Office 365, or if you're using what we call an installed collector, where you have a collector that gets installed in each one of your machines, and then you do an HTTP post over to Sumo, or you can have a collector that is centralized, and then you can use WMI or SSH to send that data over to that collector, or even syslog from your network devices over to the collector, and then on to Sumo Logic as well. So we can grab data from just about any source. That can be structured or unstructured data. As that data is coming into Sumo, every single message that comes, every single log message that comes to Sumo gets tagged with the 5 following tags. The collector, meaning, which is the name of whatever you named your collector. The source host, which is just the name of the host where the data came from. A source name, which is the name and the path of the log file itself where the data came from. Source, in this case, for example, if you could have Apache access data or Apache error data. So the source itself can help you define that. And then the last one is source category. Source category can be anything. It can be configured freely. Therefore, we normally use this as the main data metadata tag. And you'll see me using this a lot in the upcoming examples. All right, so you're new to Sumo Logic, and you want to find out what data you can start analyzing. What data is available to you? Well, I'm going to show you 2 ways of doing it. I'm going to show you the official way, and then I'm going to show you a cheeky way so you can start familiarizing yourself with the syntax. The official way is pretty straightforward. You want to go under Manage Data, and then you go to Collections to find out what data has been brought in. So let me show you in the instance how to do that. I'm going to go to a oops, I lost my mouse here. This Zoom is hiding my mouse, which is, here we go. Oh, sorry about that. Okay, here we go. Let me bring this down to the bottom because Zoom is hiding this. Okay, there we go. So let me use my instance here. This is my own training instance, which you all have access to, by the way, and you're able to run the same exact queries that I'll be running. You have access to those same exact queries. But if I go to Manage Data, and under Manage Data, I go to Collections, oops, Manage Data, and then I go to Collection, you will be able to see all the different collectors that have been set up in my training instance. By the way, this is a training instance, so there's a lot of garbage in here because a lot of people create stuff, but nonetheless, you can go and search for stuff. Let's say that I was looking to see if I had CloudTrail data. I can enter CloudTrail, and it'll come back with all collectors that have anything to do with CloudTrail. In this case, I have a collector called AWS Services, and one of the things that it's bringing in is CloudTrail data. I have another collector called Labs AWS Services, and it also has a collector called CloudTrail data in there as well. You can see that the CloudTrail data, which is here, can be searched by the name of the collector, the name of the source itself. I could even search for that source category. Remember I was talking about that earlier? If you just click on this icon in here, it will actually launch a query for you. So there you go. Source category equals Labs AWS CloudTrail. That's how I can, and by the way, in this case, because there are no spaces, the codes just happen to be not necessary, not needed. So there, I just showed you how to run a query for a particular source category for the last 15 minutes, which is the default. And there are my results down at the bottom. All right, so going back to collection, this just allows you to see what data has been brought into Sumo. So if I were to search Apache, I can see if there's any data that came in for Apache itself. All right, that's easy enough. Now let me show you another cheeky way of how to find out what data has been brought into Sumo. I'm going to use the option 2 here. And what I'm going to show you is how to run a very simple query where I'm going to ask for all the data, let's say for the last 5 minutes. And then I'm going to pipe those results, and then I'm going to count by source category. And I'm going to get a result like this. It's showing me all the different data points that I have in the source categories for them. This is a good query because you would want to know what are the source categories so that you can easily search them. So I'm just going to do that. I'm going to say, give me everything, and then pipe those results, and then count by source category. And by the way, I want to search only for the last, let's say, 3 minutes. And if I run that query, I'm going to get all the different source categories and a count of how much data I have. So from here, I can see that the data that I have most of is my Lab Apache Access, followed by Graphite, and so on and so forth. Okay, so let's say that this is great. I do have Lab Apache Access data. My boss asked me to go and find out what's going on with my web servers. Let's start tracking operation of my web servers. I want to find out if I'm getting a lot of 404s or 500s. So I need to start looking at my Lab Apache Access data. So the easiest thing to do is I can grab the source category and say, okay, show me all the data where source category equals Lab Apache Access. And it's going to, as you would expect, give me a lot of results here. Let me make my screen just a little bit bigger for your, so it's easy for you to search. So that's a lot of data in here, right? Before I start showing you how to analyze that data, I'm going to show you a couple little shortcuts. Here's the first one. What I would do is, if I'm asked to analyze data, first thing that I would do is I would find out if someone else in my organization has already analyzed the exact same data, because I don't want to recreate the wheel. So if my boss is asking me for to analyze Apache Access, I'm going to go find out if anybody else has already shared any content for Apache Access. How do you do that? Let me show you in the instance. I'm going to go in here. I'm going to go into, again, my mouse keeps getting lost when I switch. I'm going to go into this icon in here, which is all the data that exists, and I can search for Apache. Well, it just so happens that we have a lab in our training instance that makes people create a lot of Apache data. So you'll see a lot of results for Apache Access in this particular case. But let's say, let's see if we have anything for OSEC, which happens to be security data. So in this case, yes, I can see that someone called Mario Sanchez has shared a whole folder of data called OSEC, and I can go and pull up any of this stuff. But let's stick to our Apache data example only because it tells a good story. So search for Apache data, and I can see that, yeah, there is quite actually a bit of information in here. Let me just open this one called the Apache Overview Dashboard. And wow, this is great. Look at this. I'm actually now getting results without me having to build anything, because I found out that some of my peers have actually already created a lot. I can see visitor locations from Apache. I can see traffic distribution by server. I can see traffic volume and bytes. And this was just one of the dashboards that I decided to click on. So there's quite a lot of data in here that I could take advantage of. What's even better is that I can take these dashboards and I could always click on this little icon in here, and guess what? It's going to take me to the query behind that dashboard. And I know that right now this means absolutely nothing to you, but by the end of today, you will know how to read a lot of this information here. What this is doing is it's looking for that Apache Access data, then it's extracting some fields so that it can do some sort of analytics, and then it's going on and saying, by the way, if the status code matches 200s, then that's a success. If the status code matches a 300, that's a redirect. And you get the point, right? This is very similar to SQL, and to a certain degree, even though this looked at the first glance like something pretty scary, I think that you can start easily figuring it out. The good news about this is that you could always change this if you wanted. Let's say that you didn't want to, you wanted to have smaller time slices. Instead of breaking this over every hour, you might want to break it over every 30 minutes or perhaps every 5 minutes. You can make the change, you can run the query, and if this is a query that you liked and that now you prefer to have it stored in this particular setting, you can always save this query as your own query. Or you can add it to a new dashboard, you can update the dashboard that it came from, and so on. But the point is that you found data that already exists that your peers might have built, and you can reuse those dashboards to your particular needs. Okay, let's say that you're brand new and nobody has actually installed any Apache data. Nobody has done any analytics on the Apache data. So the second thing to do is to check out the app catalog. Essentially, the app catalog is a repository of apps that we have. Let me just show you that while I talk. Let me close this one here. Essentially, we have this thing called the app catalog, and what the app catalog has is a whole bunch of apps that we've already created a lot of content for them. We have so many customers that are looking at, let's say, CloudTrail data, that we already know what are the things that they want to see from CloudTrail data. We have a pretty good idea what they're looking from an Akamai perspective. We have a pretty good idea what they're looking for from an Artifactory or from an Apache perspective, or Box, or perhaps some Google Cloud stuff in here. So we get you started. Let's say that you had a Google Cloud App Engine. Here are some dashboards, for example, the activity, user activity, overview, request activity for all that data. And you have this preview dashboard, so you actually get a chance to look at what these dashboards would look like. And by the way, our documentation has detailed information about each and every one of these dashboards as well. So going back to our example, what we wanted to do was look at the Apache data. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to click on this, and I'm going to install this Apache app with my data. So if you notice, this Apache app has a whole bunch of queries. All these red boxes are queries themselves, and green denotes a dashboard. So there's about 5 dashboards and about 15 queries that come with this particular Apache app. So I'm going to install it and run it and see what happens. I'm going to click on Add to Library, and I'm going to call it the Apache, Apache Analysis. And I have to specify a source category. Essentially, what it's asking me is, okay, Mario, I'm going to give you all these dashboards. I'm going to give you all these queries. But in order for me to fill them up with your data, you need to tell me how to map to your data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell it, great, my source category is called Labs Apache Access. And if you notice, it's showing up in here. Here's the Lab Apache Access. And then under Advanced, I can even choose where I want to store it. So I'm going to put it in my personal folder, and I'm going to put it under a folder called Mario's Apps. I'm just going to store it in here and click on Add to Library. And what it's doing right now is it's installing, or it's copying all these dashboards into my folder. So if you notice now, in the library, under the personal folder, under Mario's Apps, I have a new folder called Apache Analysis, and here are all the dashboards and queries that it just installed for me. Let me open the visitor access type. And what you notice is, let me just hide this for a little more real estate. What you notice is I have all this data. I haven't created a single query, yet I'm already starting to analyze my data. I can see my breakdown by platforms. I can see a breakdown by popular devices, top 10 PCs and Mac versions, browsers and operating systems. Let's see what else got installed. I'm going to go back to here to my folder, and let's open the, oops, it's not serving. Let's open the web server operations dashboard. So these are just two of the numerous dashboards that it opens, because essentially we've figured out what are the things that you would need to understand from an Apache web server operations perspective, and we've built a dashboard for you. So notice 10 bots, 10 top bots, client locations for the 400 that you're receiving, server errors over time, top 5 clients causing the 400s, non-200 responses and the distribution of those, errors by server, and you get the point. Again, the really great thing about this is that I can always click on that icon. It takes me to the query behind it, and then I can edit this query to my heart's content. If I didn't want, in this case, I'm looking at server errors, right? What if I wanted client errors? So instead of saying where status code matches 5 something, I'm just going to say where status code matches 4 something. And I can go and edit these, or for now, I'm just going to remove them. Let's run this same exact query, and let's see what happens. I'm running this same exact query, and look, now I'm getting a distribution of 401s, 404s, 403s over time. Bingo, I've got exactly what I needed. I didn't have to go build any code. I just took something that already existed, used it as a template, tweaked it to my needs, and I can save it. I can go and say, these are my client errors. I'm going to call it Apache client errors over time. I'm going to save it in my personal folder under, just under my personal folder, and click on save. So you notice how easy it was to take something that already existed, tweak it to my needs. And if I go now to my folder, I'm going to go here. I'm going to go to my personal folder. There it is. Here's the Apache client errors over time. If I decided that this is something that my team would want to check out as well, I can click on this little icon and I can say share. And I can share this. I could share it with the entire organization, for example. I can say the entire organization gets view access to it, right? So everybody can view it. However, I'm going to add a different user level here. I'm going to say that anybody who is a training analyst, it's going to get edit access to it. In this case, I'm setting up 2 different accesses. Everyone gets to see it, but only training analysts get to edit it. That means make changes, make modifications. You notice that the third option here is manage. Manage means that not only can you edit it, but you can also delete it if you need it to as well. And I'm not going to give that access to anyone. I'm going to keep that myself. Just going to give this one, and I can say share. And what you see now is, let me open it up again and go to share and show you who has access to see this. And you notice that the entire organization has access to view it. I have access to manage it, and training analysts have access to edit it as well. That's under see who has access. I can add more roles here if I wanted to as well. And the last thing that I could do is I could also share this URL with anybody who has access to it. I can grab this URL, copy it, and share it with them so that they can see which query I'm referring to as well. Okay, any questions so far? This is making sense. Good, great. So I've shown you that you can pull stuff that people already shared. You can go install an app. Let's say that there was no Apache app. Let's say that you're brand new to Sumo Logic. There's no Apache app. There's nothing for you to share. So how do you start analyzing your data? By the way, when we deliver this face-to-face, this is where we pause and we let people try the hands-on labs. Where do you find these hands-on labs? Let me show you exactly where. If you go to the Home tab, under this Home tab, there is a Learn tab. And this Learn tab has a tutorial called Using Sumo Logic. That's exactly what these slides are referring to. In this case, it was part 1, viewing data, and it just walks you through this tutorial, which walks you through exercises of exactly what we're covering right now. For today, we're going to skip those labs and move on to the next one. So the query syntax, let's say you're going to learn from scratch. The query syntax is pretty straightforward. It is a whole bunch of operators separated by pipes. So in this case, you search for metadata and maybe some keyword, then you parse that data, then you have the ability to further filter that data, and then you can aggregate that data, and eventually you can format it. So I'm going to be building a query very similar to this one, showing you these different steps in here. All right, so let's close everything else that was here. And let's kind of start with this tab. So if you remember, this gave me Lab Apache access, let's say for the last 60 minutes worth of data. So this is 60 minutes worth of Lab Apache access data. Let's say that I really only cared for those with the word Mozilla in it. By the way, I could have said Mozilla star. I could even say Apache, Lab Apache star and Mozilla. So you can use wildcards in these areas as well in here. But it came back with all those messages that have the word Mozilla in it, right? Look at those results. There's an IP address, there's a timestamp, there's a method, and there's a URL, status code, and so on. Let's see. I see a status code of 200. I see another one 200. I see a 500. I see a 404. Wouldn't it be great if you were ops or DevOps? Wouldn't it be great to find out how many 400s I have, or how many 500s I have? Like this is stuff that I'm creating code for, and I want to find out if my code has a lot of broken links or whatnot. So what I'm going to show you is how to parse this data so you can start making sense of it. And by parsing, I mean, if you notice here, here's a timestamp. Sumo Logic automatically parses out this timestamp and creates it here. So what if I wanted to parse the IP address, or what if I wanted to parse, I don't know, the status code in here? I'm going to show you a few ways of doing it. Again, I'm going to make this just a little bit bigger for you. So I'm going to start with highlighting any message. I'm just going to use this particular message as an example. So I'm going to highlight that message, and I'm going to say parse the selected text. What it's doing right now is it's allowing me to say, all right, anything that you find between the word get and the word HTTP, I'm going to extract that, and that's going to be my URL. So I'm just creating variables. I'm using this message as an example so that I can go grab those variables and extract them from here. And I can do this because Apache happens to be a very predictable pattern, right? All messages have the same pattern. Therefore, I can do this kind of stuff, right? I'm going to grab this last one all the way to here and say that this is going to be my user agent. So what you're seeing right now is I said, take this as a variable, take this as a variable, and essentially I created 5 variables in this message, and I said, here are the names I want you to provide to those variables. Click on submit, and what it does is it builds the parse statement for me. I could have typed this, but it's a little easier to have a nice UI do that for you. If I run this query now, let me show you what happens. It runs the query. The message is still here on the right-hand side. This is the whole message. But then to the left of that are my parsed fields. There's user agent, there is URL, there is status code, size, refer, and so on. This is great because now I can do something like count by status code, because remember, status code is now a field. So I can do a quick count by status codes and see that the majority of my status codes are 200, which is good. If this is production, I want to have mostly 200s, but I also have a decent number of 404s and 500s and so on. But you start seeing how I can use a parsing statement to start identifying what I want to do here with my data, right? I could do something like find out what's the average size by URL, right? So depending on the URL they're hitting, what's the average size of my message that is being sent in here? So you notice how you can start getting pretty creative with the analytics you can do once you have parsed your data. So speaking of which, let me show you a few other examples of parsing. So I was able to parse this using what we call parse anchor because my messages are always very structured. I want to show you, let me go back to the Home tab. Under the Learn tab, I'm going to pull up the documentation. I just want to walk you briefly through other parsing options that are available to you. So parse operators. Let me pull up those parsing operators for you. And you'll notice that Let me make this a little bit bigger so you can see it. There we go. So the one that I just used was parse anchor. It's a predictable pattern and it's pretty easy to use. Pretty easy to use. What if your patterns were variable? Then what you can use regex, and I would say that most of us here have probably used regex in the past. Let me just grab an example in here. Let's see, do I have an example I can use to show you? Yeah, let's grab this one. This one is parsing an IP address, right? Let me grab it. I'll put it in there, and then I'll walk you through what's exactly doing. Go back to the query. I'm just going to drop it here, pipe, and another message. What it's doing is saying, listen, find this pattern, which is 1 to 3 digits followed by a period, 1 to 3 digits followed by a period, 1 to 3 digits, a period, 1 to 3 digits. That sounds like an IP address, right? If you find that pattern, store it in a field called IP address. So if you look at my results, that's exactly what it did. Here's my IP address, which it parsed out. And over here are all the other fields that it parsed out as well. So I'm showing you a couple of things. The first one is that you can have multiple parse statements in a query. And the second one is that all parse statements don't have to be the same. In this case, this is parse regex. In this case, this is parse anchor. By the way, if you have other types of data, for example, if you're sending JSON formatted logs, guess what? We have an operator that looks for that and can parse it easily. Key value pairs, something like name equals Mario, company equals Sumo Logic. We know what that looks like, and we can parse it automatically for you as well. If you're sending a CSV formatted logs, same thing. We know what that looks like, and we can parse it. Or if you're sending us some other delimiter, like a tab or a colon, you can use the split operator for that. So you get the point. We have quite a few ways of parsing your data using Sumo. Okay, so if there's anything that you're taking from today's session is start figuring out how to parse your data, because that's going to make it a lot easier for you to start identifying how you're going to analyze that data. But it gets better. What if you want to store this parse statement somewhere? The last thing you want to do is copy and paste it into some notepad, and then you have to paste it back here every time you run the query. The better part is you can create what is called a field extraction rule. So let me show you that. Under Manage Data Settings, you have the ability to create field extraction rules. And what field extraction rules are, I'm just going to open one of these that looks like one of our students already built. I'm going to click on Edit. This is a field extraction rule that says it's for Apache Access. And essentially, it's saying any message that comes into Sumo that has a source category of something Apache Access, I want you to apply the following parsing statement to it, right? So in this case, it's using parse regex. It's saying parse the IP address, and then parse the method, the URL, the status code, the size, refer, and user agent. So it's parsing out the exact same fields that I was doing before, instead it's using parse regex for all of that stuff. Here's the great thing, that this is going to happen at the time that the data is getting ingested into Sumo. So I no longer need to have a parsing statement when I'm searching for that data. Let me prove that to you. Since this field extraction rule already exists, I actually can get away with this query. Let me get rid of the parsing statements and just do a count by status code. Why? Because status code already exists. It's been parsed by that field extraction rule, and I no longer need to parse it myself. And there you go. You get the same results. Excuse me. So how do you know which fields have been parsed? Well, one of the easy ways is go to the field extraction rule and look at go to settings and look at the field extraction rule, and it'll tell you which fields have been parsed. As a matter of fact, it tells you right here: source IP, method, URL, status code, size, and refer. But another way of finding out is if you just run a query for the data without any aggregation, you will notice that you get your results over here, but on the left-hand side, as you see here, you actually have all the fields that have been parsed. This area we call the field browser. And if you look at the field browser, I can see that IP address has been parsed, message, method, refer, size, source IP, status code. So here you can see what are the fields that actually have gotten parsed for you, which you can start using. So there you go. I can easily do a quick query of my status codes in here. Let me pause there for a second. Is there any questions so far? Nope. All right, we've got a quiet audience today. Good. So with that in mind, let me just flip over to the slides here for just a little bit. So I've shown you how to use metadata and keywords. I've shown you how to use parsing so that you can start parsing your data. What about filtering that data? You can start doing where clauses. You can start doing, you can use the if operator. You can use the join, the lookup. And unfortunately, we don't have the ability to go through all of them today. But I'll show you a brief example here. Let's say that I only cared for status code 400, right? So what I could do is I could do something like where, or 404, I should say, where status code equals 404. And that's only going to show me the results for status code 404. But let me pause there for just a second. Why would I do the filtering here if I could do it earlier on? So that is going to give me better performance. So in reality, what I could do is, let me just grab all this here. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. I could just do and status code equals 404. That's going to give me the same exact result, but it's going to be a lot more efficient because the more you parse at the top, the less things are going to be passed on to the next operator in here as well. All right, so let's just come back to this. I have my status codes, and that I'm looking in here. Let me show you a few operators that are pretty meaningful that I think you're gonna be using on a regular basis. So, if I was a developer, I would want to see how are these 404s that I see here. I mean, there are 10,000 of those, right, in the last hour. Are those spread out evenly across my time frame, or did I have a huge spike of those at a given time? So let me just show you how to do a trend over time, and take a sip of water while I'm at it. Okay, excuse me. So I'm going to show you a new operator called the TimeSlice operator. And what TimeSlice allows you to do is exactly that, slice that time frame. So I'm taking these 60 minutes, say I want to slice them into 5-minute buckets. So now, not only do I want to count by status code, but I'm also going to count by TimeSlice. And by the way, you notice that I used an underscore in this case. The reason for that is because for every operator, the result of that operator, unless you name it something else, the result is just that name with an underscore. If you notice, I did a count by status code before, the result was an underscore count. So in this case, if I'm time slicing, the result for that would be an underscore time slice. So I can run this query now, and you notice that I have time slices and status codes. At 6:12, I'm sorry, at 10:15, for this status code, I had this many. And at 10:20, for this status code, I had this many, and so on. This is kind of hard to read. So I'm going to show you one other operator. This one's called the transpose operator. And what transpose allows me to do is, it allows me to change the table into a column. I'm sorry, it allows me to change the list of results that I have here into a table format. So I'm going to say transpose where time slice is in my rows and status code is in my column. And if I run that query now, you'll see that it's a lot easier to read. So now look at this. It's telling me that for this particular time slice at 9:55, here is the count of status codes that I had, right? So think of it as a pivot table. I just pivoted like you do in Excel, and I can see this a lot easier. Not only that, but it makes it a lot easier for graphing purposes as well. If you notice, now I can graph this very easily in here. Okay, questions, concerns so far? Make sense? Good. So I've shown you how to do a little bit of aggregation. I even show you how to do a little bit of formatting. In this case, I showed you how to use the transpose operator for formatting purposes. And that allows you to then start putting the data in a format that you want. Another tool that I want to show you is LiveTail. LiveTail, as the name suggests, allows you to run a tail session of your logs. So if you notice in here, I can run a live tail of all my Apache Access logs. So now the great thing about this is, one, I didn't have to jump into several boxes to do it. I have access straight through the UI. And two, I didn't have to go one box at a time. I actually can look at all Lab Apache Access results from all my different hosts. Or if I really only cared from one host, I could always do this, where source host equals, and then specify the name of that particular host as well. You can also do this kind of stuff. So that I only get those with the word Mozilla. You can highlight terms as well. Maybe I want to highlight the 404s, and I want to highlight the word Mozilla, and I want to highlight the word error. You get the point. I can see those. You can pause it, and you can scroll down. So everything that you would expect you're able to do with tailing a log, you can do here as well to keep an eye on what's going on. Right? Again, this is not meant to replace what you've seen me do with analyzing the data. This is just to get a real-time look at what's going on with your logs. And if you now want to do a little more analysis of it, then you would come back to this screens to be able to do additional analysis of your data. Okay, let me close this for now. Great. So no questions so far. You've shown me, you've seen me show you metadata, keywords, filters, how to aggregate that data, how to format it. There are a lot of other advanced analytics. Unfortunately, I won't have a chance to go through them, but you probably noticed that a lot of the apps that you can install use this advanced analytics. For those of you joining tomorrow's session, we definitely dive into these: how to use GeoLookup to create a map, how to use Outlier to create to identify your critical events. How do you use Predict to forecast what's going on? We talk about log reduce, which is identifying things. You saw me use log reduce in the demo today, and you saw me use log compare as well, which is looking at a log reduce now and looking at a log reduce afterwards. Brian is asking if these slides are available, and the answer is yes. After this session, perhaps not today, but certainly by the end of tomorrow or the day after, I will make sure I send you a link to the recording of this webinar, as well as to the slides themselves. So yes, Brian, I'll be sending you the version of these slides as well. All right. This is where we normally pause. We let people try some of the labs. Again, I would highly recommend that you do. Where are those labs? If you go to the Home tab, which is, I keep losing my mouse. Sorry about that. Here we go. If we go to the Home tab, you go to Learn. This is part 2, part 3, all the way down to the bottom. This is the tutorial that goes along with this webinar itself. Okay. So let's say that you now have, you know how to install apps, you know how to look at some of the stuff that other people have built. You're starting to get a good sense of how to start searching your data, how to start parsing your data. Let's say that you want to start monitoring your data. You want to create some dashboards, you want to create some alerts. How do you go about doing that? Well, the first thing to know is that dashboards are just a collection of panels. If you look at this one here, this is really just a query in some sort of graphical form. And this is another query, and this is another query, and so on. These are all just queries that are put together into a given dashboard. So how do you do those? How do you build them? So it's pretty easy. As a matter of fact, let's take our example here. Let's tweak this a little bit. You notice that every charting option that is in here has additional settings to it. So just for kicks, I'm going to show you this one, which is a column chart. I'm going to change the properties, and I'm going to call it, I'm going to make it a stacking one with %. If you save that, what you see now is you see a bar that represents 100%, and the size of each color represents a percentage within that 100% bar in there, right? So let's say that I want to add this to a dashboard. It's as easy as saying add to dashboard. And in this case, it's asking me, okay, what do you want your your panel to be titled? Let's call it my Apache status codes. Oh, convenient. The name was already in there. And it says, what dashboard do you want to add this to? Do you want to add it to an existing dashboard of yours, or do you want to add it to a brand new one? So let's call this a brand new dashboard, right? And click on, and let's say that I'm going to put it in my personal folder. And if everything looks good, I'm going to click on add. And as you might expect, what it's doing is it's just creating a new dashboard with one panel, because that's all I have in it. If I wanted to create another dashboard, I could even take the same data. Let's say that I want to take this in table format and map that, add that to the dashboard as well. No problem, you can do that. Click add to dashboard, call it status codes, status code details, for example. And I'm going to add it to my brand new dashboard. Here it is, brand new dash. Click on add, and there you go. I have two panels now, one showing me a graphical view of it and the other one showing me that kind of stuff. So it's as easy as that. Adding dashboards is literally having your data panels and then clicking on add to dashboard. There's a few options in here of things that you can do. You can also add non-data panels. That means adding a title. This is my first dashboard, right? And you can add a text panel as well. Let me show you. These actually become very important because understanding your data. I'll tell you why. The reason is because you might be the person who's building this dashboard, but it could be someone else who's actually, oops, what did I just do? Oh, I just closed the window by accident. Let's see, I did. Sorry about that. I got carried away with my Spanish there. Give me just 1 second so I can get back in there. That was nonsense. Training. Let's see. Let me just go grab. I want to go to here. Here we go to this one. Oops. Okay, let's see. Sorry about that. But basically, I was talking about those text panels. They become really important because you want to make sure that people understand what is it that you're building. So if I go back in here and just create, let me go back to edit mode. And now that I'm in edit mode, I'm going to add a text panel. Understanding your data. If you create some text in here that explains to others what this data is all about, right? You can even add links to other dashboards if you wanted to as well. You can submit that, and then you have your panel here. And let me just move my title up to the top, and you see it's pretty straightforward to move this stuff around. I'm going to bring this one over here and just the last one over to here as well. All right, so as simple as that, I just created my first dashboard. I can play with toggling the theme. If I wanted it in darker mode, you can enlarge this thing if you wanted this thing to be a little bit bigger so that you can see all your numbers. You can bring this one to the bottom, and you get the point. It's just a matter of moving it to how you want it to show. You can clearly delete it, you can start, you can full screen. There's something called data access level. This means, do I want, if I share this dashboard with someone else, do I want them to run this dashboard with my data access level, or do I want them to have their data access level? For example, you could have users who don't have access to production data, only dev data or only lab data. You can set that kind of access in here as well. You can refresh this. You can obviously share this dashboard. Remember before I was showing you how to share a query? Same thing. I can share this dashboard with my entire organization, or I can share this dashboard only with training analysts or whatever I want to choose from there. I can also, with dashboards, the sharing is slightly different. I can share this dashboard with outside of the organization if I wanted to as well. So if I want to share this dashboard outside of the organization, I toggle this, and then anybody who has this link would be able to see this dashboard. That means they don't need to log into Sumo. They don't need to be part of your company. This could be your VP who wants to look at a dashboard but doesn't have a Sumo login. However, that's a little dangerous, right? That means that everybody can see it. What you can do as well is you can say, I want the world to be able to see this dashboard, which is what I was just talking about, or you can actually whitelist IP addresses. So you would have to go to the dashboard IP whitelist and start entering which IPs you are going to provide access to view this dashboard as well. All right, so pretty flexible in terms of sharing stuff in here. And then the last thing I'm going to show about dashboards is that you have the ability to add filters. So for example, let's say that you had a different AWS regions and you wanted them to be able to use this dashboard as a template, then you can create a dashboard and tell folks enter your region, and then users of this dashboard would come in here and they would say, oh, I am US West 1, for example, or I am US East 2. And they could enter the region, hit enter, and then all the dashboards would get reset to show data only for that. They get filtered. Of course, I don't have any data for US East 2, but I just wanted to show you an example of how that would work in there. Okay, questions on how to use dashboards? Pretty straightforward. Great. And once you're done editing, you have the ability to turn a dashboard into live mode. Okay, the last thing that I want to show you with this is, oh, by the way, in here you would go and try to create a share a dashboard, modify a dashboard. The last one I want to talk about is monitoring alerts. So, or I should say monitoring through alerts. So creating alerts is actually pretty straightforward. The mechanics for doing that is pretty easy. For those who join tomorrow, I'm going to talk about how to create meaningful alerts versus just alerts. But to create an alert, it's super, super easy. Let's say that we have this query here, and we really only care for those that are status 404, and status code equals 404, right? So here is my status code 404. Here is my TimeSlice, and I can see that they hover around, I don't know, 900. So what I could do is I could just have a where clause here and say, if I ever get anything where count is greater than I don't know, 940, I want to be alerted. So as a matter of fact, I don't even need to make it look that pretty. In this case, I'm just going to say count by TimeSlice and status code. And if I ever have a count that is greater than 940, let me know. And in this case, I do. I have 946 and 943. So let's say that I wanted to be alerted for when something goes above that threshold. All I have to do is I set up this where clause, which means that I'm going to get results. If everything is under that, let's say 950, then I don't get results, and therefore I should expect no alerts, right? But if my threshold was 940, then clearly I get some results. I should get some alert. I'm going to show you how to build an alert. It's super easy. First thing is you want to save that query, right? As part of saving that query, you have the ability to schedule it. You notice that right now it's set to never, the run frequency is set to never, but I could say, well, I want you to run on an hourly basis. And run on an hourly basis, and by the way, go and pull this much data. Or I could say, go and pull 60 minutes worth of data every time. And then I can say, by the way, I want the time zone to be, I don't know, LA time zone, DST. And when do I want you to send me a notification? Well, you can send me a notification every time the search is complete, or probably more interesting is, let me actually give you a condition. And if that condition is met, then send me a notification. Well, in our case, if I ever get results, whether it's 1, 2, or 20 results, I want to be notified. So if I'm going to say here, if number of results is greater than 0, then alert me. Because if I get no results, then don't alert me. But if I do get results, whether it's something that is greater than 0, then go ahead and alert me about this stuff. Makes sense, right? Pretty straightforward. And then I can say the alert type, I want you to send me an email. I'm going to send it to mario@sumologic.com. It's pretty straightforward. And then I want the email subject to say, hey, search alert, or alert, or whatever I want this to say. I can tweak it to my needs. I can use some of these variables, as you see here, Here are some of the variables on the right-hand side that you can use. And I can decide to include in the email the query itself, the result set, a histogram, and I can even include a CSV attachment of the alerts. Again, by the way, this is not meant to export alerts. There is a different method for exporting, but just notice that this will be limited to 1,000 results. By the way, you can export your results from here from the UI if that's what you want to do as well. Okay, pretty straightforward. So some of the things that I didn't talk, that I just went over, is that you have a few different types of alerts, and we'll cover these with a little more detail tomorrow for those attending. But in short, I have the ability to not only send email, I can send it to a webhook. So anything that has a REST API, for example, Slack or PagerDuty or HipChat, I can send it to that. I can also save the results of my query into another index so that I can search for them later on. I can also do a script action, which means it can trigger running a script of your choosing. So Sumo Logic doesn't know what that script does. All it knows is where it sits, and you can call that script and do something with it. And that script has access to the results as well. So fairly straightforward, building an alert from this. Okay, with that said, I want to leave a little bit of time for questions as well. Looks like there is a question from the audience. Let me just take a look at it. The question is, how do you go back and modify this alert later after saving it? Oh yeah, good question. So let's say that you create an alert, it's out there. What you would want to do is you go to, let me just, I should have saved it and I didn't. Oh, that's all right. It works the same for alerts as well as queries. What you do is you go back and search for your alert. So you go back to your folder, you go to your personal folder in that case, you identify the alert. Let's say this was the alert itself, and you can just click on it, and you can click on edit as well. And let's say that you want to change, if you change here, you can change the query itself, or you can change the scheduling of that. This one happens to be never, but it would be in like hourly, and you can go here and change whatever you want from it. So just remember, essentially what you have to do is go find it from your personal folder, and once you find it and you open it, you have the ability to edit that alert as well. Okay, cool. So I'm going to briefly talk about metrics. Essentially, metrics allow you, as you saw on my demo, you have the ability to overlay your logs with your metrics. Your metrics identify the what is happening, and your logs help you identify why something is happening, right? So the ability to correlate those two. Metrics, the sources of the metrics are mainly three sources. One is we can bring in your host metrics. The good thing about that is that if you already have an installed collector that is bringing in logs, that same exact installed collector can pull the host metrics from that server where it's sitting. We can also bring AWS metrics. So AWS sends all its metrics to CloudWatch. But guess what? We can go to CloudWatch and grab those metrics and bring them into Sumo. And the third area is graphite compatible metrics. So if you're using a StatsD, a CollectD, something like a Drop Wizard, we can go and grab those graphite formatted metrics and bring them into Sumo as well. Right, so it's fairly straightforward from that perspective. You can also set up your dashboards. You can also set up your alerts with metrics, just like I showed you with logs. As a matter of fact, the demo showed you a case where you had both logs and metrics in a dashboard itself. When it comes to metric alerts, we actually call them metric monitors. There's some predefined thresholds that you can use. You can use a critical threshold, a warning threshold, and even a missing data threshold as well in there. All right, so with that said, where do you go from here? Well, first things is you have a Learn tab. I've shown you that Learn tab numerous times. That Learn tab has not only the tutorials, which I would highly recommend that you try, it has some cheat sheets, it has the documentation, it has a link to the training instance. Probably the more important one from all this is community. If I would highly encourage you check out community, because there's a lot of good info, not only questions from other users, but also posts from a few of us on good content that is out there. So link to community, you'll find a lot of good information out there. And then last but not least, before I open it to questions, is I would highly encourage you to get certified. You now have attended the QuickStart webinar, which is in here. The second step is to taking that tutorial, and like I said before, that tutorial is the same one that is here in the Learn tab. And if you take that tutorial, you'll notice you'll feel pretty confident that you'll be able to take that that certification itself. So with that said, let me pause here for just a second and let me open it to questions.